And hello again from WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. Good to have you here on this Monday afternoon. I'm Josh Manning, Deputy Managing Editor for Assignment here at the Western Journal. Joining me today, reporter Grant Atkinson and Assignment Editor Joey Chester, or as we called him when he was applying here, Joey Chestnut, Joey Tribbiani, Joey Stalin. There were all these other Joeys, and they kept popping into our heads.
Lots of famous Joeys, I guess.
Lots of famous Joeys, but he is
honored.
Clearly the best Joey. He's
I am
the best
not
Joey
one of
we've
them.
ever experienced. No, he is one of the best that we've ever experienced. He's not one of the bad ones. So we are here today continuing the discussion on Ukraine. The situation there continues to develop. We're actually partnering with CityServe, which is a Christian missions group. They have put together 1 million meals and are deploying them to the Ukrainian border right now to help refugees. You can find out more about that by going to just searching, I believe it's cityserve.org. You can just do a Google search for CityServe and Ukraine. So Ukraine is what we are interested in all the way around here. And kind of later breaking news, today Vladimir Putin did offer a set of terms to cease hostilities in Ukraine. And Joey, you were following that earlier. Take it away on that.
So we'll just go over the list of demands. Putin, I think, wants to end the conflict. I really don't think he wants this to keep going because it doesn't look good for him on the world stage, and a lot of innocent people are dying. There's a lot of Russians that aren't happy with what's happening. Yeah. So the first demand of Putin to Ukraine is that Ukraine must halt all military action. The second demand is that Ukraine needs to recognize Crimea as Russian territory, which is something that Putin has wanted for a long time. And the third is that Ukraine must recognize two regions of its territory as independent countries. And the final one is that Ukraine will not pursue joining NATO. You know, that is part of why this conflict is happening is because of Russia's fears of Ukraine joining NATO and NATO forces being on the border with Russia. So what do you think about these demands? Are they reasonable? Do you think he should accept them, Zelensky?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. If I were Zelensky, I think I probably would accept them. The only problem with that is that I'm not Zelensky. I don't know this from a Ukrainian perspective.
Yeah.
The idea, so this is super similar to, it was really interesting when these came out because General Michael Flynn wrote an op-ed exclusively for us last week talking about how we could end how the Ukrainian invasion could be ended almost overnight. Right. And one of the things he suggested there was Ukraine allowing Crimea to go back to Russia. Yeah. And not on its own. In fact, you guys can put that up if you want to in the booth. We've actually got a comparison of Flynn's proposal versus Putin's proposal. And I think that's on screen now. Hopefully you can see it. But Flynn essentially said that Russia wants a neutral Ukraine. So the idea was that the Ukrainians go back to the Budapest Agreement, which said that they were not going to try to acquire nuclear weapons. Russia would leave them alone. Britain would leave them alone, and the U.S. would. Part two of Flynn's proposal was get the Ukraine to renounce any claim to Crimea. And if you see that, that is term number 2 for Russia's demands. Ukraine must recognize Crimea as Russian territory. And then Flynn suggested that the third thing is Putin needed to back off and essentially admit that the targeting of civilians and what we would consider war crimes, that he did not support those, and that those were rogue generals, rogue military units, and that they would be punished, et cetera, et cetera. So when you look at Putin's demands, he wants Ukraine to halt all military action. Well, I'm sure Ukraine is more than willing to do that if Russia will withdraw from its soil. Ukraine recognizing Crimea as Russian territory, that's a hard pill to swallow because it has been Ukrainian. It was Ukrainian for years and years. Yeah. The Ukrainians invested a whole lot of money in it. They've spent a lot of money fixing it up. It's a nice fixer-upper, Crimea, and they would rather flip it than have it stolen from them. Can you put that back up, please? And Thank you. Then third, Ukraine has recognized 2 regions of the Eastern Territory, so that's Donbass and Luhansk. I'm sure I'm saying those terribly wrong. I mean, why not be rid of those if you're Ukraine? It's a horrible mess over there anyway. And Ukraine must amend its constitution to bar the country from pursuing NATO membership. Now, I'm sure they don't like that. I would think that would actually be the hardest.
I think so too,
because of the security guarantees that would go with that. I mean, if I'm Zelensky, I would take the deal because it ends. And good heavens, what if you don't take the deal? You know, we were talking over the weekend about, gosh, I can't remember who I was listening to, but like we had a similar thing where we were looking at an invasion that would have gone really badly. We would have been having to go house to house. The population absolutely despised us and would have fought us tooth and nail to the very end. And that invasion was the main islands of Japan. And instead of doing that, Curtis LeMay went in and firebombed them, and then we unleashed 2 nuclear weapons. So you wonder what Putin will do if they don't take this deal. I mean, Putin wants to get them to the table if they don't take it. I mean, if I'm Zelensky, that's what I would be worried about.
Yeah. I just, honestly, if I'm Zelensky, I don't know if I want to take this deal just because I don't feel like the Russians are making any concessions. Like we talked about on the show on Friday about Flynns' proposal, like you said, and a couple of things in there were, one, they would have to pay something for Crimea because, like you said, Ukraine has fixed it up a lot, and so they would have to pay something to kind of, pay back those improvements that Ukraine has made to the area. And then the second thing was that he would pay for some of the damage that he's done to the cities, other cities besides Crimea, other territories, whatever you call them. And also that he would apologize and say that it was never his orders to attack citizens, or to attack civilians, I'm sorry. And I don't know that he would do that or that.
Totally his orders.
Totally. I don't know that that's true or that he would say it. But I think a big part is the money thing. I think having to pay something, make some sort of concession. I don't know. And I think you're definitely right that if Ukraine doesn't take this, the consequences could be much, much worse. But my issue if I'm Ukraine is Russia's not really giving anything up in this other than they're leaving, but they're getting most of what they wanted. So I'm not really sure they're making enough concessions for me if I'm Ukraine.
Is that the biggest thing then? They're getting most of what they wanted. Is that most of what they wanted? Is that NATO's finally out of Ukraine for forever? That there's no hope of NATO setting up shop. Is that the big thing?
I think that's probably their biggest win from it. What Putin views as his biggest win from it. Now, the other issue he would run into is if Ukraine gets granted membership to the EU, then there is potential that there could end up being troops on the ground on the border of Russia. But the Ukrainian people strike me as the type to not give up, to fight to the end.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we've seen. So my thought is that Zelensky just says, no, we're going to fight this out to the end. I mean, think about it. Russia has not unleashed nearly all of their military power on Ukraine. They have held back their full military power, and maybe they've been brutal, don't get me wrong, but maybe part of that is they're hoping that Ukraine will come to the table and come to this agreement. So my fear is if he says, no, we're not going to accept these terms, Russia will unleash the full military power. Yeah. We'll see a lot more civilian death than there already has been, and Ukrainians will continue to fight to the death. And I worried that literally will be the death of many, many, if not nearly all at least Ukrainian men that are saying to fight. It's like, I mean, you don't really have an option here. Like, it's either fight to the death or take the deal. Which one is it going to be?
I was listening to John Mearsheimer. I think it was Mearsheimer over the weekend. He's an eminent political scientist and very well versed in the affairs of Ukraine and Russia. And I think he was the one who said the Western powers are willing to fight to the death of every last Ukrainian.
Yes.
And that's what this feels like a little bit.
Does.
Yeah. I think the Russians thought they could roll in and try a kind of a shock and awe sort of thing, and that the Ukrainians would just think, man, this is way more trouble than it's worth. But it turns out that the Ukrainians really despise the Russians more maybe than anybody thought, including Putin.
So let's say that it is Russia's goal. They want to take over Ukraine completely. They want to make it a part of Russia. Do you think that they they do that without any issue if they unleash all of their force? You think they can easily take Ukraine, or do you think they would have a little bit of a struggle? I mean, I don't know.
So they'd end up fighting an insurgency.
Yeah.
That would be, we know Afghanistan worked out really badly for them there. And I think it was Victor Davis Hanson who was saying, essentially, Putin doesn't see a way to win an insurgent war in Ukraine as long as the other borders are open. As long as their land borders open, or the ability to get material and troops in via water, then there's no way they can win. And then how do you shut down? Poland, Romania, Hungary. Mm-hmm. Is there one more? I can't recall if there's one more or not. So how do you shut down all of those borders? You've got to encircle the entire country.
Mm-hmm. Right, but to me, that would be an argument for Ukraine to not take this deal, because they're like, fine, if you want to try to have a full-fledged war and you want to try to take us over, like, we'll fight. And like you said, that seems like something the Ukrainian people, based on what I've seen of them during this invasion, seems like something that they might do. I'm not saying it's smart, but I could see it happening.
It's like, how much death and destruction is worth it? I mean, I don't want to see Putin win. I don't think anyone wants to see Putin win. But you also have to think about, I mean, really, how many deaths is it worth Ukraine going through? How many lives want to be lost? I mean, even if they win in the end and they don't give any concessions to Russia, what'll be left of the country? I mean, if every major city is destroyed and a large portion of the men are dead from their country, is there really a country left? I mean, if all the culture is gone, if millions, there's countries talking about taking in millions of Ukrainian refugees. If there's nothing left in Ukraine, what was the point of all the death and suffering to win? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe to send the message, don't you dare flirt with NATO, or we will do this to you too. If we're willing to do this to Ukraine, which provides an energy corridor for us to sell, us being the Russians, for us to sell our energy that funds our state at this point, if we're and provides an enormous amount of grain for us, if we're willing to do that to them, imagine what we will do to you, other state that dares oppose us. Here's what I can't figure out. So in 2014, the Ukrainian government flipped. Now, some people say it was a coup orchestrated by the West. Yeah. Some people say it was essentially an overthrow of a Russian puppet government. I can't figure out. They say that Yanukovich, I don't think I'm saying that right, but he was Viktor Yanukovich. He was president, and then in February of 2014, there was a coup or a change in government, and he was replaced. He was pro-Russian. He was replaced with a pro-Western president, and the government became incredibly pro-Western. And I can't figure out how a vehemently anti-Russian population would elect a pro-Russian president and then be behind the ouster of that same president and now fight to the death, tooth and nail, against Russians. I don't understand that. I don't know what to make of that.
I don't either.
I mean, was Yanukovych? I feel like such an idiot for not knowing how to pronounce that, but I'm not Slavic. So was he just a complete puppet for Russia? I don't think there's any fair elections there at all. So maybe the SVR and Putin, maybe they set up the entire thing. And that may be why it was so unpalatable to the West. And the West wanted to flip Ukraine in favor of a pro-Western government. But I can't figure out how in the world a Ukraine that's fighting this hard ever would have elected a guy who's a puppet for Putin.
I feel like there's got to be some sort of outside influence going on there, because I don't see the Ukrainian people as people who are majority pro-Russia. There are some, like in Crimea and like in these areas
Yeah.
that we've talked about, but overall, I don't think that they're pro-Russia, at least not to the point where they're like, oh, we might as well just join Russia. I mean, they want to be their own country, at least most people there, so that makes me think there had to be some sort of outside influence in that election that caused that.
I mean, look at the way Russia runs their elections.
Yeah.
Putin always
exactly.
manages to get 100% of
Exactly.
the vote somehow. They really love Putin. He's
very popular.
No, he's very popular. So I'm with you, Grant. I think there's probably some sort of outside influence. I don't know a lot about that election. I mean, maybe there was a mass propaganda campaign. Both Ukraine and Russia are really good at propaganda, both for the outside world and for the people in their country. So maybe Ukrainians didn't realize that this was someone super pro-Russian, and there was a mass propaganda campaign ran by the Russians in Ukraine.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it sounds like something that maybe wasn't done the best.
If I remember correctly, the pro-Western opposition to Yanukovych was he was actually poisoned during the campaign.
that is
I
correct.
that is correct.
Yes, I
isn't
think
it?
you're right. Yeah.
And in fact, actually, if you guys in the booth want to look for a picture of him, it's a before and after picture from the poisoning. It's stunning, and there was almost no doubt that Putin or at least Russian operatives were behind that. So that leads us to another interesting idea, and that is this idea that's floating around right now that what's happening in Ukraine is ultimately the United States' fault. If you listen to some academics, some geopoliticians, I mentioned John Mersheimer earlier, the realist school of foreign affairs people, they're saying, look, the West stuck its nose in what was going on over there. Ukraine's not in our backyard, it's in their backyard. We flipped the government so that it was not pro-Russian, it was pro-American, pro-Western, and now this is what we've gotten. Putin was ticked off about it. He tried to signal, he pushed back in 99 when NATO started expanding. He pushed back in 2000 and I think 4 or 5 when it expanded again. He pushed back again in 2009 when it expanded. And finally, when we flipped the government there, it was just too much to bear, and he went and took Crimea. So, I mean, do you guys think, is the United States actually responsible, or let's draw a wider circle, is the West in general responsible for what's happening there now?
I think the West plays a big role. I mean, to understand this conflict, you have to understand why Putin is invading Ukraine. Putin didn't just wake up one morning and decide, I'm going to go kill a bunch of innocent civilians in Ukraine and take over the country.
Yeah.
He's ultimately trying to protect the sovereignty of his nation, right? Not that what he's doing is good. I don't want to sound like I'm pro-Putin or pro-Russia, but he's ultimately trying to protect the sovereignty of his nation, just like we would in the United States with our borders. And so I think the West encroaching on Russia with the EU, the United States, NATO, Putin feels threatened by that. I mean, he's at odds with nearly all the countries that border him to the I'm trying to think of a map of Russia to the west. And he's alarmed by that. So I think that the West is partially responsible. I mean, we installed a president in Ukraine that is not pro-Russia. So I think the U.S. and the West bear some responsibility that we should recognize. And to understand why Putin is doing what he's doing, you have to recognize the West's role in this conflict, because we are at least partially responsible.
So Mersheimer says the first round of NATO enlargement took place in 99. That's when the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland came in. The second was 2004. That was Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia. It says Moscow complained bitterly from the start. During NATO's 95 bombing campaign against the Bosnian Serbs, Boris Yeltsin said, "This is the first sign of what could happen when NATO comes right up to the Russian Federation's borders. The flames of war could burst out across the whole of Europe." Fast forward, one Russian newspaper reported, let's see here, this is when we were looking at, this would have been in the mid-2000s when we were looking at bringing in Georgia and Ukraine. One Russian paper reported Putin telling Bush, saying about a discussion between Putin and Bush, Putin, quote, very transparently hinted that if Ukraine were accepted into NATO, it would cease to exist.
Why are we surprised at what's happening?
Why are we surprised at what was happening, at what is happening? That's it. And so the realist school, their take on all of this is that, look, this has been coming. How in the world was this a surprise to anyone? The West acted so surprised, so caught off guard when Putin had over and over said, look, this is not okay. Starting with Boris Yeltsin warning, this is not a good idea, guys. And when an alcoholic Boris Yeltsin warns you about something, you should listen. It said, look, this is not a good idea, and we ignored it. And I think when we think about expanding NATO, we're thinking about Western ideas of freedom and security, and why would Russia? We have no intention of invading Russia, and we don't have any intention of invading Russia. However, we have pro-democracy organizations working in Ukraine like crazy, trying to make them more Western, and the Russians have got to be sitting there thinking, well, if they do that to them, eventually are they going to try to do that to us?
Yeah.
So if you're Vladimir Putin and you're sitting there thinking, okay, I've pitched a fit over this, they overthrew the guy I had in power at the country next door to me, then they turned the government against me. Well, okay, let's send them a message. We're going to go take Crimea. When just, 6 years before that, they had messed with Georgia and South Ossetia and, I can't remember the third region's name, but Putin's got to be thinking, I've told you, I've telegraphed you, how many invasions do I need to make, small invasions, before you get the idea? I don't want this in my backyard.
Yeah. I believe there was discussion at one point before Russia took Crimea of them building a NATO naval base on Crimea.
Yes.
Which would have been very alarming to Putin. So, like we're saying, to understand this conflict, you have to understand where Putin is coming from. That's just something I cannot stress enough. I feel like so much of that is being missed in Western thought. This surprise that Putin is invading Ukraine and this idea that he's just doing it to kill. We need to understand our role now. We got to take some responsibility. That's the biggest thing I can stress.
I don't understand why the United States has been so intent on installing this more Western democracy in Ukraine. Like, what?
Why are we involved?
I don't even understand what's in it for the United States, really, other than we think our way of government is the best, and I believe that. So, like, if other countries have that, I'm sure that's good. But, like, is it really worth pissing off Putin because we want to make Ukraine more of a democracy? I don't think that is a really good trade for the United States to invest in.
It's like, look what we've done now. Look what we've done.
Yeah.
Look at what it results in. It results in a thug invading another country. Is this what we wanted?
Yeah.
So the question is, how much of this is the post-war order still perpetuating itself here 80 years later, or 70 years later? After World War II, the United States, with the fall of the Iron Curtain, the United States felt like, okay, well, we have to control the world, otherwise the Soviets will. And that can't be allowed. We're about freedom. They're about domination. We're about democracy. They're about totalitarianism, et cetera, et cetera. And so that became what we did. We were going to control the entire globe the best we could. And where they moved, we would move as well, and we would fight them. And we would topple democratically elected governments and replace them with strong men who would answer to us. And I think that was probably the thing to do, because what else do you do in the face of communism? The communists certainly weren't going to play fair, and if we had been nice and said, oh, well, we won't expand our domain of influence if you won't expand yours, they would have taken that deal in a heartbeat, and we would have been surrounded in no time. But now that threat, at least from Russia, doesn't exist anymore. But I think we still think we need to spread liberal democracy everywhere that we can. That's what we did for the first 20% of the 21st century.
Yeah, it's a question, I think, of what does it take to get the U.S. to be, this involved in European interests? And obviously communism was the answer to that. Now Russia, and I agree with that. I think that if there's a threat of communism, we need to go snuff it out immediately. But now Russia is not a communist country, and so I don't think that it is completely appropriate for the United States to act in the same way that they would if Russia were a communist country. And I think by being involved in Ukraine, they're maybe not to the same extent, but you're getting close to the same sort of action we would have taken when Russia is still a communist country. And it's like we're not realizing Russia is not communist. Vladimir Putin is not a communist. So I think we haven't really adjusted the way that we're acting based on the change of Russia.
So imagine, Grant, a world where the Chinese create a military alliance and then invite Canada to join it. I mean, what's
boy.
what's
We'd
the
be
American
horrified.
response to that? What's the American response to that?
Well, we gotta do something to snuff that out. I mean, obviously.
Yeah, it can't stand. It
Yeah.
can't stand. Exactly. And I think that's what Putin is probably feeling right now is I mean, going back to Yeltsin's comments about the Serbian bombing, imagine if this were on our border. Now all of a sudden, oh my gosh, it almost is on our border, and so they decided to invade. So Joey, should we? And there is just something in Americans that wants people to be free. We don't like the idea of one country going in and dominating another country, regardless of whether or not we did that throughout the 20th century. We had a good reason to do it, which was to stop communism. But on the whole, we want people to be able to determine their own fate. Why are we worrying about Ukraine and balancing out Russia when China is spreading its tentacles across the entire globe in the Western Hemisphere, the Eastern Hemisphere, and the Western Hemisphere, the Northern Hemisphere, and the Southern Hemisphere? Why are we tolerating that and facing down the potential for nuclear warfare in Eastern Europe?
It's something I can't wrap my brain around, why the West is so invested in what's happening in Ukraine. I cannot figure it out. Every politician, nearly all of Congress was standing on the steps of the U.S. Capitol with a half Ukrainian, half U.S. flag, proudly displaying it. If you watch the State of the Union, everyone was wearing Ukrainian colors or
There was
Ukrainian
more support
flags.
for their flag than
Yes,
ours. Yeah.
and I can't wrap my head around it. Meanwhile, as this is happening, China is conducting air exercises and sea exercises near Taiwan. And no one says a word about it in the U.S. We don't care about China. China has done more harm and damage to the world in the past 20 years than Russia has. I mean, their tentacles are in the United States. They are impacting the United States as we speak.
Everywhere.
What is Russia doing in the U.S. currently? And then you get into a larger question. What role does the U.S. play on the world stage? Do we want to be the police for everyone?
There's the post-war question.
I don't think so. I don't think we should be the police for every country, especially when you have a country with so many domestic problems like we have. And we have our own invasion at the southern border. We had 2 million people cross the southern border last year, more than the entire size of the Russian military. Gas, I just saw before we walked in here, set a new high today. We're now paying the highest price for gas in U.S. history. It surpassed 2008. We have an extremely divided country with out-of-control inflation, a supply chain crisis. Yet we're concerned about what's happening in Eastern Europe, in a place that doesn't really affect us. Actually, it only affects us the more we get involved in it, the more we escalate and call for World War III and nuclear war. Yeah, we can support the right of self-determination for the Ukrainian people. Of course we support that. But should we really be getting heavily involved in something that could end up leading to World War III, nuclear war? I don't think so. Especially when China is dominating the world like they are.
Yeah,
that's our real threat. They are hurting us as we speak. What is Russia doing to us as we speak? I don't know.
It's
nothing.
So it's so disingenuous to me. Like, I see these leftists and they have this Ukrainian flag as their picture on Twitter and on Facebook. And it just frustrates me. And I feel like people probably think that I'm like not caring. I'm not compassionate. I don't care about Ukraine. It's not that, but I think there's two things. One, like you said, I don't believe that America should be the police for the world, and I don't really think that it's our job to go try to set up democracy in Ukraine.
Right.
And two, the second reason is, like you said, I think China is a much bigger threat. And I know for a fact that every single one of these leftists who has a Ukraine flag on their bio or who has like a I stand with Ukraine shirt that they're posting a picture of, none of them would have an I stand with Taiwan flag.
Way.
None of them would have an I stand with Taiwan t-shirt. And so it's just like, I know how fake it is, and that's what gets to me. It's not that I don't care about the people of Ukraine or that I don't think that they should have the right to self-determination. I think it's just how disingenuous everyone is, and the fake caring from the left. I mean, from the West, when they don't actually care. It's not just the left; it's all the West, and when they don't actually care about snuffing out real threats like China.
Yeah, they don't care about real domestic threats. They've completely ignored it. Like, when's the last time you heard of Congress passing a bill? I can't remember the last bill that they passed, but they sure passed the resolution supporting Ukraine with no issue.
And then the three people who said that they didn't want to pass that for legitimate reasons, those people are like the worst people ever. How could you not
evil.
stand with Ukraine? You're so mean.
Yeah. They're
Like,
pro-Putin.
Yeah.
I'm not pro-Putin, but I'm also not pro getting involved in an Eastern European country. I am pro self-determination, the right of self-determination for the Ukrainian people. But like this shilling for Ukraine is just really frustrating.
I want to know what version of any of this is pro Putin. Is it pro Putin to want him to invade? Well, I don't think that's very pro Putin. He's getting kicked in the teeth for it. Is it pro Putin to want him to withdraw? He's going to get kicked in the teeth for that. Nobody's actually pro Putin. I don't
no
think,
one's pro Putin
except Putin.
I think
the Russian people don't seem to be pro Putin.
No,
the Russian House doesn't seem to be. No. There are reports from people, well-connected journalists, saying that they're talking to people in his administration who are saying this is nuts. The whole
world is against Putin.
No, I think that's another media fabrication that they've made, which is that there's some sort of conservative who's like walking around and like, I love Putin, and he's got like an I Heart Putin sticker on his truck. Like, that person doesn't exist. I haven't met a single person who's like, man, Putin is really doing great things. Like, I love Putin. I haven't met anyone who says that.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No.
They tried to paint
the same thing I'm going to.
Trump as pro-Putin and much of the right. Remember, none of this happened under Trump. If Trump was so pro-Putin, wouldn't he have given the green light to Putin to invade Ukraine?
I told Vladimir Moscow would be gone.
Yes, what Trump said. If you do it, I'm going to bomb Moscow. And Trump made the point, like, he didn't need Putin to believe him 100%. All you need is Putin 10%. To say that there was a 5-10% chance that it might be real to keep him from doing that. But Joe Biden and the West is so weak right now that we can't display that strength to Putin. Trump was less pro-Putin than Biden. Biden has allowed this to happen.
Most viciously anti-Russian, the Trump administration is the most anti-Russian administration.
The type of conservative I am, the Trump
Maybe more
stance on this.
People were so concerned with, Trump being too friendly with other countries' leaders. Is he too friendly with Kim Jong-un? Is he too friendly with Putin? But the way that he actually led and ruled the country was in a way that he's not going to allow them to infringe on other countries. And Joe Biden, he can go out there and harshly denounce what Putin is doing all he wants.
Release a statement.
Yeah, but but he's actually not doing anything. So is it better to have Trump, who you think he's too friendly, but he is, actually keeping Putin from doing things that are detrimental? I think it is.
World leaders didn't want to find out what would happen if they did something that Trump wouldn't like.
Yes.
They didn't want to find out.
The consequence was the potential price was too high.
We need the restoration to that type of leadership.
All right, so I want to ask two more questions. I'm going to give you a heads up. You get the last question. I'm going to tell you what it is now. What does a world look like if the U.S. isn't policing it? Right, that's the question I want to come to.
That's interesting.
But first off, I want to ask you, Grant, what does the world look like if China invades Taiwan and all of a sudden we don't have any microchips being produced? I mean, it's sad that there are wheat fields that aren't going to be harvested in Ukraine, but we're here in Phoenix. We're putting in hundreds of thousands of square feet of production facilities based on Taiwan being able to export microprocessors.
Yeah,
the whole
I mean,
Western world depends on it.
We're building a giant Taiwanese microchip factory,
Yes.
like
Right
10
down
miles
the-
from where we're sitting
Yes.
right now.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's
and they supply the West.
yeah.
Yes, they
I
do.
think that is obviously so much more detrimental to the United States and to the entire world
Yes.
than if Ukraine were to get taken over by Russia. And I don't want that to happen. I don't think that Vladimir Putin should be able to go take Ukraine and make it a part of Russia. But China is so much more of a threat than Russia is, and nobody's talking about it. It doesn't make sense to me, and I think that's the main reason why the Ukraine thing doesn't make sense. If people want to say that they're concerned about Ukraine because they want those people to be free and they want the best for the Ukrainians, that's fine. What I don't understand is how they can simultaneously have so much care in the world about Ukraine and then not a single care about Taiwan and about China. Like it's those two things together that makes no sense to me.
I think it's because it's morally easy, I think, to support the Ukrainians, and it's not as morally easy for people on the left to support Taiwan. And also, there's a difference, but there's just something about seeing tanks and convoys rolling over fields and over people, and you don't, it's an island. You can't mass troops. I mean, you can, but we're not nearly at that point with the Taiwanese. I think when those pictures started coming out, it might be interesting. But I agree that the vast majority of people, certainly on the left, who are wearing yellow and navy now, yellow and blue now, would not be wearing Taiwanese colors.
No.
All right. So that's the core question here is, what do we look like in the post World War II era if the United States doesn't control everything?
So I think a lot of how the world operates is on optics. That's why Trump was such an effective president, because like I said, world leaders didn't want to find out what would happen if they didn't do what Trump wanted them to do. So, and I think you can't have a strong U.S. on the world stage unless you have a strong U.S. domestically. So I think turning away from being the world's police and focusing on our country domestically will actually make us look stronger on the world stage, because we have a unified U.S. with a focus on traditional Western values. We have families that are doing well. We have an economy that's doing well. We're producing products here at home. And people look at us and they say, man, the United States, we do not want to mess with them. We don't want to do something that they don't like, because they are clearly a strong country. So I think if us not being involved, have our tentacles all over the world, actually allows us to be stronger here. And in turn, it actually makes us stronger on the world stage, because we're a stronger country at home.
So what do you do with China then? How do you counter them? And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of thinking through this with you. I don't know. I think I tend to agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
But it's like, don't we have... And I mean, look, we're not meeting China where it is right now. So, hey, big whoop.
Yeah.
Maybe it wouldn't make a difference.
I mean, can we handicap China economically?
Yeah, by doing more domestic
production. To what extent? I think that's the first
Tariffs,
thing. Is,
raise,
But can we do that without hurting ourselves?
That's one thing that Trump focused on, was trying to reduce the reliance on China. I mean, that's the only way I can think of doing it. I mean, our ties with China. It's so funny because we're so opposed to China, but we're so tied to them at the same time. We rely on them so much.
Insidious.
Yes,
it's insidious.
It's terrible. And so the only thing I can think of is handicapping them economically in a way that doesn't hurt the U.S., that doesn't hurt Americans.
Democrats and the intelligentsia back in the 90s did this to us when they talked about how great free trade was. And free trade is great. We got a whole lot of products for very cheap.
Yeah.
And it let us cheat for a while because we haven't had income increases in forever, but we were able to get cheaper products. So everybody won, blah, 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 except for the people who we had to lay off, and then they became opium addicts and died. It is really insidious what has happened with free trade and most favored trading status with China back in the 90s. I mean, they got their tentacles into us, and they were smart. I mean, they knew, get connected on a level where if the U.S. severs the connection, that it'll be like lopping off your right arm.
Yeah.
And that's where we are right now.
Yeah.
And Biden clearly does not know what to do with it. It's not clear to me that Trump knew exactly what to do with it, but he clearly knew more.
He tried.
He at least had a little bit of an idea.
Yeah. And they backed down. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, we went over. We weren't sure we were going to have enough to fill the entire time, and now we've gone over. Thank you for sticking with us through this episode. Remember, WJ Live is here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. If you're watching online, be sure to click the subscribe button and then also click the little bell that pops up. That's going to make sure you get notified every time we go live. Also, Facebook continues to throttle us. They are continuing to destroy our traffic. And we depend on ad revenue generated by that traffic to keep the lights on here. So if you feel led to support us directly, you can go to westernjournal.com/join. That's westernjournal.com/join. There's several options there for how you can partner with us, actually get more great content that way, and know that you are directly supporting our fight for America, conservatism, for Christianity, and traditional values. I think that is it for us today. For Grant, for Joey, I'm Josh Manning, and we're going to see you back here Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific.